My name is Erika Mildred, and I am beginning my 15th year of teaching. I have taught at a Lutheran high school in Sacramento, California, followed by classical Lutheran schools in Colorado, Iowa, and now Texas. I currently teach for Faith Lutheran School in Plano, Texas, and also for Wittenberg Academy, which is our online classical Lutheran program. Today we are going to be looking at a review of how to prepare lessons classically. And in order to do so, we're going to start at the broadest level with curriculum maps and guides. We'll talk about quarter, course, unit, and daily lesson plans, and then we'll talk about the classical pedagogy and methodology all throughout. And I will provide examples and handouts later in the presentation. Just to kind of follow a good classical model to kind of give you an overview of where we will be going today. I'm first going to review the classical tools that we have in our arsenal for planning. And then I am going to go over specifically how to take those and kind of look at them in terms of kind of the layout, the curriculum mapping and planning, what those look like. That's where the handouts will come in handy. Course planning, unit planning, and individual lesson plans. And I do want to save about the last 10 minutes or so for question and answer and discussion, because I'm sure a lot of you as educators, you have already done planning at all of these levels, and so I'm sure we all have different nuggets of wisdom that we can share. So let's go ahead and start with the classical tools that we have as classical Lutheran educators. We of course have tools that broadly can fall, or at least are more broadly used and utilized in the trivium tools of grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Then we have tools that fall into our quadrivium, arithmetic tools, geometry tools, music tools, and astronomy tools. You will see throughout this presentation that all 7 of these categories found within our 7 liberal arts can be applied pretty much to every subject, and I encourage you to apply them to every subject that we teach on a day-to-day basis. So let's start with trivium tools and what we have to work with, especially at the grammar level. So first of all, we want to keep in mind that we are going to want to use these tools regularly and often for our students that are in grades 4 and below. And already from my morning sessions, we're very loose about, okay, where's the grammar level and there's a lot of overlap. Really, it depends even on the student, right? Different students kind of flow through. Sometimes they regress and then go back and so forth in terms of kind of the maximum level they can handle. But we should always be using grammar level tools for all of our students, okay? We never stop using grammar level tools. Anytime we are introducing a new subject, a new concept, starting a new unit, a new lesson on something, we should be reverting back to these grammar level tools. It's just that if they're in grades roughly 4 and below, okay, that's probably the only tools that you'll be utilizing. And if they are in high school, you're going to be utilizing all of the tools. The grammar level tools help us as teachers to drill and repeat material. So if you kind of want a bulleted, when should I use these? Okay, anytime you want material repeated, reviewed, or drilled, you're going to want to use these tools as you plan your lessons. Unit and lesson plan focus when using grammar tools should be on things like facts, rules or exceptions to rules. If you are a teacher of English, you probably sometimes feel like you're teaching more exceptions than rules themselves, definitions, and vocabulary. So now let me give you some examples of these grammar level tools that we have in classical education. The first one is memorization, and we do that with or accompanied by recitation through chant, either with or without music. So this works really well as a tool when you want things memorized or learned in a certain succession or pattern. In other words, when order matters. So some examples of this from different areas that we teach. If you use the Shirley jingles, it has a question-answer flow, and of course it goes in a very specific order, right? You start with the subject and the verb, and then they do any adjectives and adverbs. Then at some point you label the article adjectives, then you do prepositional phrases, then you get to the end of the sentence and you analyze the punctuation, then you go back and you find the prepositional phrases. So there's this pattern so that you can help students analyze the patterns of a simple sentence or the parts of speech found within a simple sentence. Latin fist pops. I steal this from Joanna Hensley. She presented it at CCLE in 2013, I think. Okay, but here's an example from Latin when we want to kind of have a memorization thing. She talked about teaching kids with for Latin, since they need to know the endings are so important in Latin, right? Because they carry that meaning. And so she taught them for, like, if you were going to learn amo in past tense, right? You would say amabo. You do the stem and then you do the ending. Amabas, amabat, amabamus, amabatis, amabant, right? And then you could say it in English, right? I was loving, you were loving, and so forth, okay? All the way through. Not only is this chanting, but notice you also are getting kinesthetic as well. Okay, yes, it makes it fun, but more importantly, you know, it kind of creates the muscle memory of the mind that we want in addition to the body. Another example, more from history, would be songs like 50 Nifty. Not sure if any of you have heard that, but you can actually YouTube that. That's not just a classical thing, but it's a great way to learn all of the capitals in order. 50 Nifty is all the states in order, alphabetically. President's Sound Off. There actually is a capital song, too, that you can learn. So you can have kids learn these songs. Even when you're in the early grammar stage, right, they're learning days of the week and months of the year. There are often jingles or songs for those things. The example I have, and I'm going to go forward a slide and then come back. The last example I have is memorization of subordinate conjunctions. So this is a jingle I came up with probably about 15 years ago. Now, subordinate conjunctions, kind of a little background, and if you don't teach English grammar and writing, you may think, okay, I'm not sure that this is going to be helpful for me, but how many of you, whether teaching it to your students or whether you yourself, how many of you love all the comma rules? All the comma rules in English. Well, let me ask this. How many are there? How many rules are there to use commas in our English language? Any guesses? 7. I like that. Yeah, I actually teach 6, but yes. Okay, normally in a normal English grammar book, you're going to find somewhere between 30 and 50 different ways to use commas. And it basically goes, it doesn't categorize them in any grouping. It just basically says you use a comma for this, you use a comma for this, you use the comma for this. That can be very overwhelming to students. And at some point, they're just like, I don't care. I'm just going to, if I don't get a comma in, or if it's there and it shouldn't be, I'm just going to not worry about it. So I've always taught all punctuation through sentence structure. And that's where my subordinate conjunction jingle came into being. So did you guys know that you have something called the independent clause? That's actually what Shirley grammar is based on, right? All her 5 patterns are basically the simple sentence. You have a subject, you have a verb, you have a complete thought, okay? There are actually 4 types of sentence structure. So you have the simple sentence, you have the compound, which is 2 of them with a coordinating conjunction, and a comma, that's one of the rules. Okay, you also have a complex sentence which introduces a subordinating clause or a dependent clause. Well, what's the difference between an independent clause and a dependent clause? Anyone want to take a guess, or does anybody know? There's only one difference, because it has a subject and it has a verb. It doesn't have a complete thought. Well, what is it that changes between the independent clause and the dependent clause to make the dependent clause not have a complete thought? Which means if it sat by itself, it'd be a fragment, right? Big writing, no. What's the difference? The answer is these words. 21 subordinating conjunctions make all the difference. So when I teach this, I'll go back. Don't panic for those of you who are trying to write down. Okay, I'll go back. I teach students to memorize this, okay, in kind of a jingle form. These are the 21 most common subordinating conjunctions. If you stick one of these 21 words in front of a subject, verb, very simple sentence, you get a dependent clause that must then, okay, have an independent clause to go with it, which, by the way, when we want to teach our writers to be better writers in middle and high school years, we want them to go from just writing Shirley grammar simple sentences to writing more complex and compound complex sentences. But so you see how they need to know this first, need to know how it works. And then, by the way, and see, this is why it's really nice in English, because, you know, we have all these exceptions, but here's something that's never an exception. If you have a dependent clause followed by an independent clause, we always take a comma. Always, 100% of the time, okay? And if you switch it, by the way, this is why we don't put a comma before because. If you ever just learned that rule, right, you never do say, set it at a comma because, and your English teacher said, nope, no comma there, and you're like, why? Because we don't put a comma there, but why? Here's why. Anytime we have a dependent clause after our independent clause, we never put a comma between them. So it's kind of nice in English when we have an always rule and a never rule and never any exceptions, but this is how I would have them learn it, okay? I have them in front of you. We're gonna learn them one column at a time. I'm gonna say all 7 in the first column first, and then I'm gonna have you repeat after me. So it goes like this: after, although, as if, as long as soon as, because. Now, if you notice, I threw a little California, because I first did this when I was teaching in California. I did a little California girl as if you have middle or high school students, this repetition and chanting is not as exciting as it was when they are, I know it's shocking, when they are kindergartners, but I don't let that I do it sillier. I do it more ridiculous, so that even in the eye rolling, okay, and I tell them if it's not a certain volume and certain energy, we're just gonna do it again, okay? And they actually like it. They just pretend that they don't like it because they're very cool at that stage. But let me say those 7 words again, and then I'll have you repeat it, okay? Don't forget the as if, okay? After, although, as if, as long as soon as, because. You try it. After, although, as if, as long as soon as, because. Good. Okay, next column. Before, if, in order that, since, so that, than, though. Now, I did this first when I was in California. I did not have any sort of a Southern accent whatsoever. It is becoming more and more comfortable for me the longer I live in Texas. But why do I emphasize than? It's not the same reason as if. That was just for whimsy. Why do I say than? To separate it from then, okay? Because then is not a subordinating conjunction. Then is an adverb, all right? So I'll say that one again. Before, if, in order that, since, so that, than, though. You try it.
Before, if, in order that, since, so that, than, though.
Good. Last column goes like this. Unless, until, when, whenever, where, wherever, while. That's just for whimsy again. Unless, until, when, whenever, where, wherever, while. Good. One more time.
Unless, until, when, whenever, where, wherever, while.
Good. Now, if you said this for, how long did that take? I mean, and I was explaining things in between that normally with your students, you're not going to explain your philosophy behind why you're teaching them things. Okay, so probably 5 minutes. You do that 5 minutes at the beginning of class for a week, they'll have it memorized. You can give them a quiz on it, okay? If you don't believe me, they'll have it down. And you've now tooled them, okay, with something that they can then use as building blocks for understanding. And they can not only say, oh no, a comma doesn't go there when they're editing their own work or when they're peer editing, but they can tell you why. So that's just one example. Let me go back now. See, that puts everything up there. Great. Okay, so that's memorization. Memorization and recitation through chant with or without music, okay? And those, I just gave you an example for, well, Shirley Jingles is English grammar. We have Latin, we have history up there. We have basic, geography information you can do it with. I did another example for kind of older students for English grammar. You can do this for anything. Okay, so again, think back to what I said over here. We use grammar tools to help us as teachers to drill and repeat material. So whenever you need to drill or repeat, go to this section. Okay, another tool that we have, like memorization and recitation through chant, is repetition, or I have /catechesis. Now, what's that word catechesis doing up there? I mean, is it because we're going to talk about the catechism? Well, yes and no. I mean, we do use repetition in our catechism, but did you know that catechesis is actually a pedagogical word? It is not a theological word. Some of you are shaking your head, yes. It comes from two Greek roots, kata, meaning after, and eche, meaning sound. So in catechesis, students sound after or echo after to learn something word for word. And if you think about it, this is why Luther vehemently opposed the changing of his wording of his catechism once it was put into print. And of course, we as Lutherans, what have we done? We keep changing the wording, but what does that do? And that really affected me on a personal level, because I was catechized and confirmed, and I memorized the catechism. And then the year or two after that happened, my freshman or sophomore year, they changed the catechism. So all my brothers were now memorizing around the table, and we were, reciting as my parents were working with us. And I would say it the old way, and they would have to say it the new way. And yes, it just wasn't good. But yes, so that's why Luther did it. It was a teaching tool, right, to help the children learn the faith, right? Sometimes the programs are called Learn by Heart, or and we're speaking the faith in a kind of, just as a father or a head of the household says to his children, in a back and forth manner. This kind of method works well for definitions, rules, and for vocabulary. We also have mnemonic devices. This is great when word for word isn't necessary. We need just some sort of hook or just some sort of memory reminder, so that when we think this, and then we can get to where we need to go. Okay, that's basically what mnemonic devices do. One example I don't have with me, but there are, and these are not classical materials, and so honestly, when I use them, I have to edit them. But there are a couple volumes of something called vocabulary cartoons. They take words commonly found on SAT, and they take those kind of words, and they link it through a cartoon. So they have the word, they have a link word that sounds like the word, and then they have a cartoon that kind of shows the word with the link all together, and then they have a caption underneath that. So we have like all this kind of connection between visual and verbal. The reason why I say that you need to look at this and edit it first is some of the cartoons are drawn like, with very risque, sort of pictures and stuff. So I always like drawing little dresses over them and, shade them in before I photocopy. But otherwise, it works great. The other one I have today that we're going to do together is a stacking example. So this is another way to do mnemonic device to help students learn things. Okay, so now this is only the first half of it. And that's all I want to say, because I want you guys to participate in it without knowing what you're doing. And let's see, do I have any students? Miriam isn't here, is she? Is Miriam here? Okay, you can't say anything. Okay, you know what this is. Do not give it away to anybody else. All right. Okay, so I want all of you to put your hands like this. In your hands is a big platter. We're going to call it a plate, but it's huge, like for Thanksgiving dinner. Okay? And on the bottom, it says made by Della. So in your hands is a plate made by Della. In your hands is a plate made by Della. Good. All right. On top of this plate, balancing perfectly on the eraser end, of course, is a number 2 pencil. So there is a pencil on a plate made by Della. We have a pencil on a plate made by Della. Okay. On top of that pencil, sitting comfortably, trust me, okay, I don't think it's sharpened, is a Jersey cow. So we have a Jersey cow on a plate made by Della. Good. On top of that Jersey cow, sitting very proud, is King George. So we have King George on a Jersey cow, on a pencil, on a plate made by Della. Good. On King George is a cut. So we have a cut on King George, on Jersey cow, on a pencil, on a plate. Suddenly, King George says, achoo! Probably not that, like that, but he does. Okay? So he says,
achoo!
With a
Cut
on
King George
on
Jersey cow
on
pencils
on
plates made by Della.
Good. On top of his nose that just said chew sits Mary Queen of Scots, miniature version. So we have
Mary Queen of Scots on a shoe
with a
cut
on
a King George
on
the cow
on
a pencil on a plate made by Della.
Good. On Mary Queen of Scots, we have a Wait, already there? Yes, we are. Okay, we have, this is, who's here from Memorial? Which way is south? Thank you. So we have a south-pointing weather vane. So we have a south-pointing weather vane on
Mary Queen of
Scots, a shoe and a cut on King George, on a Jersey cow, on a pencil, on a plate made by Della. Good. And on that weather vane pointing south, there is a ham, like a big one, okay? So we have a ham on a weather vane pointing south on Mary Queen of Scots, and a shoe with a cut on King George, on a Jersey cow, on a pencil, on a plate made by Della. Good. On that ham, if you flip it up, it's stamped, and it says Virginia baked. So we have Virginia baked ham pointing south on Mary Queen of Scots, on a shoe with a cut on King George, on a Jersey cow, on a pencil, on a plate made by Della. Good. And on that Virginia baked ham, we have a York peppermint patty. So we have a York peppermint patty on a Virginia baked ham, and weather pointing south, and on Mary Queen of Scots, a shoe and a cut on King George, on a Jersey cow, on a pencil made of plate made by Della. Good, two more. On top of this York peppermint padding is a weather vane pointing north. So we have a weather vane pointing north and a York peppermint patty on a Virginia baked ham, on a weather vane pointing south, on a Mary Queen of Scots, a shoe and a cut on King George, on a Jersey cow, on a pencil, on a plate made by Della. And finally, on top of that weather vane pointing north, we have a Rhode Island red rooster. So we have a Rhode Island red rooster on a weather vane pointing north, on a York peppermint patty, on a Virginia baked ham, on a weather vane pointing south, on Mary Queen of Scots, a shoe with a cut on King George, on a Jersey cow, on a pencil, on a plate made by Della. Now, what have we been doing? Just talking about these random objects stacking on one another and having a lot of fun, but what are we doing? But what are we memorizing? Hopefully not things like a chew and a cut on King George. What are we memorizing? Any guesses? What's that? The 13, yes, in the order that they did what? Ratified the Constitution of the United States of America. That's right. Now, there's a date for each one of these, and so that's why I said this is only the first half of the stacking exercise, and then you could come up with a way for the students to learn. But you now know, and your students could know within one class period, the order of the 13 states to ratify the Constitution of the United States of America. Plate made by Della, who was the first to ratify the United States Constitution. Delaware. Followed by? Followed by? Good. Followed by? Georgia. Followed by? Connecticut. Okay. Followed by? Massachusetts, good. Followed by Maryland, okay, actually named after, that was a really good one, right? Followed by weather vane pointing south, South Carolina, followed by, now this one's pretty tricky because we started with the ham, New Hampshire, and then Virginia baked, so then Virginia. So it was New Hampshire, then Virginia, then York peppermint patty, York, New York, okay, then weather vane pointing north, North Carolina, and followed by, finally, Rhode Island red rooster. It's in the name, Rhode Island, okay? All right, so there's an example of stacking. Now, again, sometimes the more whimsical, I'd rather call it whimsy than silliness, because, silliness just sounds like frivolity and there's no purpose, right? Whimsy means we have a purpose, right? Sometimes the whimsier, the better, right? Sometimes that really makes it stick in our minds. So there's another way that you can help your students memorize information, tie it to something else. All right, we already talked about that. Okay, let's move on to logic tools. We're going to use these tools regularly for students in grades 5 through 10. And again, those grade levels are approximates, okay? But we're going to use these tools for all students when they ask why or how. And this is when I like to pause. My kids are now out of this stage, finally, but you all remember, if you don't have kids that you teach at this level every day, that you will get, why is like one of the favorite questions of every 4-year-old on the planet, right? They are not asking a logic level tool why. They're not saying, oh, please explain this to me, using Socratic reasoning. They're not saying that when they say why. Typically, they are either saying what for, like they're really asking a what question, and they just don't know how to say it any other way, or they're being argumentative. It's one of the two, okay? But what we mean, use it for all students, what we mean is when they really ask why or how. Yeah, but how? Yeah, but how does that work? Yeah, but why does it do that? Okay, when they're actually puzzling and wrestling, they are wanting some logic level explanation. Okay, even if they're younger than these grades, and even if it's only temporarily and then you lose them, that is what they're wanting at the moment, or what their brain is desiring. Logic tools help us as teachers to organize materials and teach process. So in your lessons, if you have needs in your lesson planning and in what you're trying to convey in terms of content to students, where you need to help them organize or compare it or kind of structure it, or create this kind of flow for them, that's when you want to use a logic tool. Unit and lesson plan focus when using logic tools should be on things like cause and effect, connections between concepts, and again, the true whys and hows of subjects. Okay, so examples for this. The biggest one we have, one of the best tools that we have been given from antiquity, is the Socratic method. So using the original definition, Socratic method is a form of inquiry, engaging a student in a series of questions and answers to discover truth, usually through an indirect method leading to a contradiction that proves the original premise false. When you study Euclidean geometry, you actually learn how to do this as a way to do a proof problem. You would do it indirectly. You assume the opposite to be true, and you keep saying, well, if this, then this, if this, then this, if this, then this, and then you run into a problem. And you say, okay, well, then my first if-then wasn't right. So if it's not this, it must be the opposite of this. Okay, that's kind of the original definition, but you can expand. It's been expanded to include both direct and indirect discovery of truth through question and answer. And here's where it can really be effective in our daily lessons. So I want to give you both a direct example of using Socratic method for something other than literally doing a philosophical argument back and forth, and then I want to give you an indirect method as well. All right, so I'll just kind of hold this up here. So our equation that we are going to solve is 2x plus 3 equals 4x minus 7. I would not on day one, when I haven't even introduced any sort of grammar level terminology, right? Because we weren't going to use these logic level tools till we've used the grammar level tools. So I would already have pre-taught the terminology that students would need to be able to solve this algebraic equation. First of all, they'd need to know what equation was. They'd need to know what other things would they need to know? What would they need to know in order to solve it? And I'm not asking you to solve it right now, but what are some things that they would need to know? The word solve, okay? What does it mean to solve an equation? Good. And when we say that, what are we solving for? Anybody know what? Okay, besides x, does x ever have a name other than x? Like what are x and y? Variable. They need to know variables. They need to know terms. They need to know order of operations. They need to know inverse operations. These are the things they would need to know. They need to know what equality means, okay? These were the things that we would study at the grammar level first. But once they had all these things down, okay, and we're just going to assume that that's all of you now. You all have that down, okay, so just play along if you don't, okay? You all know all of those terminology, all of that terminology. So what I would say is this to my students, and this is an example of Socratic method, a direct method of question and answer in order to solve this algebraic equation. Is my variable on two sides of the equation or one side of the equation? Two, very good. Which term should I move? Well, we know that the variable is on two sides of the equation, so it's this term right here and this term right here. Anybody want to take a guess? There's technically, both are correct, but there's one easier way to do it. So I would teach the students to move the easier one. So which one's the easier one to move? The 2x, the smaller one, okay? We're gonna move the 2x, good. How do I move it to the other side? Subtraction, good. So once I do that, you can do that on paper, okay? If I had a whiteboard, I'd be doing it with you. Now once I move it, what's my new equation? How does it read now? 3. 3 equals 2x minus 7. Then I would ask them this, what are the 3 questions to ask? Now this is what you don't know. Okay, one of the things I teach, and I'm going to kind of, I guess, highlight a little bit of the session I'm doing on Wednesday, because I had the opportunity, I was studying my master's this last year and a half, and I had the opportunity to do classroom research for my thesis project. And I did it on using trivium tools for algebraic equation understanding. And so one of the things I teach my students is something called 3 questions. It's something I've come up with, and it's basically 3 questions to ask, and sometimes we ask it over and over and over in order to solve an equation. So the 3 questions are, and what is attached to my variable? And then we answer it. How is it attached? And then we answer it. How do we move it to the other side? And then we answer it. And it's nice because what is attached to my variable is always a number. How is it attached is always an operation. And how do I move it to the other side is always the inverse operation of the second question. So even students who have math anxiety, label themselves as I can't do math, which isn't true, have felt like I just never understand what's going on, they can do this because asking and answering those questions is actually almost grammar level. And as long as they can identify the difference between a letter and a number, they can do this. So I'll ask these questions and answer them as well. So what is attached to the variable? The answer is 2 and -7. Which one do I focus on first? See, and these are all the things that I would have pre-taught them, because there are 2 things. We can't move them both at the same time. I mean, eventually you learn you can, but you want to teach the students, do them one at a time. So if there's a 2, obviously this is over there. Let me rewrite this. At least we can talk about the new equation. 3 equals 2x minus 7. So the 2 and the -7 are attached to the x. Anyone want to take a guess? You got a 50-50 shot. Which one do we move first? Do we move the 2 first or the 7 first? 7. Good. So we say, what's attached to my variable? 7. How is it attached? Subtraction. How do I move it to the other side? Addition, right? So then we will add it. Oops. 10 equals 2x. Now we do it again. What's attached to my variable? How is it attached? How do I move it to the other side? Elizabeth, I'm going to put you on the spot. How many times did you say 3 questions in my class? 7th grade. About. Out loud. How many times did we say it? Every day. Okay, for several problems. So what is that? Maybe 500 times? Probably. Do you think if students say this process out loud 500 times that they're going to be able to solve algebraic equations and it's not going to be hard anymore? Elizabeth, do you even have to think about it anymore? Yeah, you don't. It just comes. And then they learn how to do things with that, like, okay, well, what happens when we have to do distributive property or other things? And even if we do things that are quadratic, exponential, everything can kind of fit into this. Okay, well, how do I treat this kind of two sides of the equal sign? All right, so there's an example of solving an equation with the Socratic method directly, okay? You can do that with any subject. If you can take Socratic method, which primarily is used in the trivium arts and in the trivium subjects, and you can apply it to something in the quadrivium, then you can apply it to any of them, any subject you wish. Okay, example of indirect. This is where we're going to assume the opposite, and then we are going to continue with the logical if-then assumptions until we reach a contradiction, which will tell us that our original premise must be false. Okay, so this also is a great logic level tool to work with students because they're going to understand the duality of truth versus falsity for statements. Okay, there is no truth to me and truth to you and 20 different truths. Okay, things are either true or false when we look at them logically. So what we're going to do is consider this statement. The earth is not billions of years old. Okay, that's the statement we're going to work with. Would an evolutionist agree with it? The earth is not billions of years old. Would an evolutionist agree? No. Okay. So let's assume this premise. Suppose the earth is billions of years old. This is also really a good exercise for students that are in the junior high level and the high school level. Because they are so convicted, and it's good, of what they believe, but you need to be able to kind of separate your emotions and take the opposite position and be able to argue it logically until you can show that this is wrong, okay? So we're going to all assume today that the earth is billions of years old. Everybody assume it? Assume it, own it, it is, okay. If the earth is billions of years old, then the universe must also be what? Okay, that's logical, okay. If the universe is billions of years old, by the way, this also is teaching the conditional statement, right, and the syllogism formula, even if you haven't gotten to formal logic with students, okay. If the universe is billions of years old, then have our solar system and other galaxies likewise been in space for billions of years? Logically, yes. Is our solar system expanding or contracting over time and space? It's expanding, yes. And again, these are the grammar level knowledge nuggets that if your students don't know, you should have already pre-taught, okay, before you get into an exercise like this. Yes, our solar system is expanding. All scientists would agree with that, okay? And has there been any evidence of this process reversing or fluctuating over the time it has been measured? Nope. And if we were to reverse the process in time, in other words, go back in time, what should our solar system be doing? If we're going to look at our earlier solar system, it should be contracting. That's right. It should be getting smaller. And is there enough distance between the sun and the earth for this contracting of our solar system to allow this process to continue for billions of years and still promote life to exist on Earth? Nope. At this point, your students may not know the answer. They might guess it, but then you'd be like, are you sure? Don't just let your kids get away with guessing it. So, well, I don't know. Well, let's go back and look. Well, let's measure it. Let's go into and figure out how big is it now? What is the rate of contraction? Again, we're using the same numbers and the same rates of change, right? We actually, as young Earth creationists, we actually acknowledge that rates may not be the same over the time. But evolutionists don't. They say uniformitarianism, right? They say the rates are always the same. So we're just using that logic, right? So at this point, they can measure the distance between the sun and the earth, the rate of expansion that can be measured scientifically, the distance that the earth must be for the sun to still allow for any sort of life to occur on earth. And they could also calculate the distance between the sun and other planets. Therefore, then once you've done all the calculating, come back. Therefore, since the sun does not have enough room to contract over this vast amount of time, what do we know about our premise? And they should say, our premise must be false, and the earth is not billions of years old. That is an example of indirect method of Socratic method, okay, indirect proof. You could then go back and do the same process with them, and you could do millions, million, 500,000, 150,000, and get smaller and smaller and figure out, help them to kind of build a case against and refute against a kind of old earth sort of premise. Okay, teaching questions to ask and answer. When we have students memorize a question answer flow, like Shirley, or even like my back and forth flow for algebraic equations, we are actually combining grammar and logic tools together. Hopefully you recognize that. We are also teaching them a way to seek knowledge. Ask good questions to get good answers. The more you use Socratic method and help your students start to do the same, the more we prepare students with the tools to learn independently. Okay, moving on to rhetoric level tools. We're going to use these tools regularly for students in high school, but we're going to use these tools for all students as they express new thoughts, original interpretation, or creative expression. Rhetoric tools help us as teachers to help students express themselves eloquently, persuasively, and effectively. So when you are doing unit and lesson plans, using rhetoric tools, your focus should be on interpretation, refutation, argumentation, and the creation of new material. So we get a lot of classical rhetoric tools from Cicero and from Aristotle. Quintilian as well. So you have the 5 divisions: invention, arrangement, style, memory, and delivery. One that I think is very applicable to a lot of different subject areas is to do 3 Aristotelian appeals. In my online class at Wittenberg every spring, I do anatomy and kinesiology. This is an online PE class with studying the body systems as well. And one of the things we do is we look at a health topic article each week, and we analyze the Aristotelian appeals. So teaching students those appeals and then having them kind of rhetorically analyze how strong is the logos, how strong is the pathos, how strong is the ethos, and why. That's a really good exercise. If you've never done that with students before, they get logos and pathos pretty quickly. Logos is kind of the appeal to the mind, right? Logic. Pathos is the appeal to the heart, right? The emotional appeal, the hook, the tug, okay? Ethos is harder for students to kind of grasp what it is, because it really isn't an analysis of, we got mind and heart, right? Ethos is really how well is there a connection between writer or speaker and audience. That is the ethos. What is the credibility? What is the trustability? What is the impact and the amount that you can say, I think this writer or this speaker is right on. I think that they are not just trying to trick us. I don't think they're just trying to sell us a bill of goods, that sort of thing. That's the ethos. So getting your students to kind of pay attention to that is super important in this world, especially, right? Given this day and age of the media, right? Also, classical rhetoric tool is writing an oratory using the progym. The progymnasmata is a series of exercises that has been used in education since Greek and Roman times, and it kind of is a series and level of activities. They would really use this to prepare orators, right? And how to, but now we have some great curricular materials and classical writings on how to apply that to writing as well. So writing and speaking, those are great tools that we have. Okay, let's get to the quadrivium. Intentionality with numbers is how I've titled this. So we have the kind of breakdown of the 4 arts of the quadrivium. We have the arithmetic, the study of numbers; geometry, the study of numbers in space. I'm using Boethius's kind of categorization. Music, the study of numbers in time; and then astronomy, the study of numbers in space and time. So the question is, and I've kind of shown with the trivium how that fits into all different subject areas, okay, both in the trivium arts and the quadrivium arts. Now I want to talk about how do you incorporate the quadrivium into all the subject areas. Well, grammar. There's a difference between ordinal and cardinal numbers. Boy, that's one of my pet peeves. When's your birthday? I ask somebody. July 23rd. Ew, I cringe. It's not that I don't like that date. It's that that's not how we say dates. How many of you have ever seen a calendar with 23RD printed on the calendar? Anyone? No. Now, if we say the 23rd of July, we sound a little snooty, but at least we're using the number correctly. Okay, there's a difference between ordinal and cardinal numbers. We see it in plurality, whether we're talking about English or Latin or any other language. Comparative and superlative adjectives have to do with number. And then, of course, singing jingles, right? You can study grammar by singing, and singing is music, and music is one of the arts of the quadrivium. Okay, science. We have measurements, of course. And I know science and math and science and the quadrivium always seem to kind of go hand in hand. But I think they all should go hand in hand like that. So you have measurements, you have data in experiments, direct and indirect proofs. We do that all throughout Euclidean geometry, in addition to the scientific method. Seeing proportion and infinite repetition in nature, and singing jingles. History. You can do dates. Dates are numbers, right? Dates tell us how far back in the past something occurred. We have numerical facts and figures. We have studying great mathematicians and scientists of the past, right? We can have the history of math and the history of science, and singing jingles. Fine arts, rhythm. We have counting and beats, proportion in primary colors to create secondary colors, studying and performing music, learning proportions of thirds, fourths, fifths, and octaves. I don't know why I didn't put and singing jingles in there, but I should have. And finally, theology, God's orderly quantified creation, the study of infinity, the fact that there were 6 days and 6 nights. I mean, there's all sorts of numbers in the Bible, right? Chanting and singing in chapels. So all of these things, and of course I have mathematics on here, but obviously, how do we incorporate mathematics into mathematics? Hopefully we can do all of that. But this is the way we can, I like my word intentionality, right? Being intentional with numbers. We're very intentional with words. We need to be just as intentional with numbers as we teach children. Okay, so now let's get into how do we then take all of these tools that we have and then put them into what my administrator is asking me to turn in every week, right? How do we do that? And here's where handouts come in. We want to start, when you're planning, you want to go broad to narrow. You want to start with the broadest component of your subject. So that should be your curriculum map and guide, and your course plan and syllabus. So you can see examples of that. When we do curriculum maps, this has been something that CCLE has recommended for several years at least, is very different from how progressive schools encourage curriculum mapping, right? Curriculum mapping is always in terms of student objectives, and it's very behavioralist. So at classical schools, we tend to be encouraged to do truth statements, and they're content-driven rather than student-driven. And by student-driven, I mean the student will know the 21 subordinating conjunctions. Really? Well, I hope they will. But do you see how I'm planning for something based on what somebody else may or may not end up doing? What if my student refuses to memorize with me? What if my student just is like, I don't like this, I'm not going to do it, right? So when we do curriculum mapping, we try to make it content-driven. What are the truth statements that are coming out of my lesson? There are 21 subordinating conjunctions that begin dependent clauses, which then take a comma when they precede the independent clause. That would be a truth statement about the lesson, as opposed to the student will learn or memorize 21 subordinating conjunctions. Okay, see the difference? All right, so I have an example of a blank one done on Excel, and then a filled in one. This is my faith and science class that I teach in the winter for Wittenberg Academy. So you can kind of look at that. Then you're going to want to determine the use of quadrivium and trivium tools. I should probably back up a little bit. I talked about curriculum map and guide. So the next one is a guide, okay, which is a little bit different than a map. And it's a subtle difference. So your school may want one or the other, okay? A guide it is more This is what the scholar is going to do each week. So it is more kind of in line with the way the progressive map is written, but it kind of outlines almost like on a lesson by lesson, or even like sub-lesson, right? The 2 or 3 objectives within it in the curriculum. So it'll probably kind of take the front part of your curriculum and like flesh it out, okay, of what you're literally going to be doing to accomplish whatever your truth statements are. Okay, and then I think I have some syllabi in here as well. Let's see, what did I include for you guys? Yep, so I have a high school level syllabus, and then I have a kindergarten syllabus. It's not called syllabus, of course. Okay, it's called kindergarten class information, but it's kind of the basic same thing as the high school syllabus. It's just kind of broken down for these are the things we're going to be covering this year, and what we're going to be studying. Okay, so then we're going to want to, once you kind of flip through your packet there, you're going to want to kind of look at your class by quarter. Now, I suppose you could divide it into some other kind of unit or grouping, but I find quarter planning is a really good step between your whole year-long plan and then your weekly lesson plans. It helps you to kind of visualize and map out not just what you're covering when, which is important, okay, and it's helpful to see it kind of on a weekly calendar rather than just on a monthly, month-by-month calendar. But it's also helpful for you then to put in, and I recommend abbreviations, but you can do it however you want to, your tools that you're using. Your grammar, your logic, your rhetoric tools, your quadrivium tools, what it is that you want to do, okay, and you can use abbreviations. This is just to help you so that, and you kind of have this out as you're doing your weekly lesson plans. Oh yeah, I definitely want to do that stacking, right? So you might say L, for logic, and then stacking right next to it, to remind yourself to make sure to do that for this particular lesson, okay? And then for each unit, and for each quarter, you're going to want to break it down into weekly lesson plans. Now, this is an example of my lesson plan. This is what I do for Course 2 for math. Okay, so I have that in the packet. Some of you may have, or maybe your school provides to you one of these, right? Lesson plan books. Okay, this is not something that has to be typed. It can certainly be handwritten. What I like to do with mine, and one of the reasons I like to type it, because I don't have to retype this whole top part, okay? I figure out, when I'm doing my syllabus, what my grammar, logic, rhetoric, and quadrivium objectives are for every class. This is how all 7 liberal arts will be touching this class throughout the course of the year. Not every day, sometimes not even every unit. Okay, and then I have in there the grammar objectives are all at the grammar level, the logic objectives are at the logic level, the rhetoric levels are at the rhetoric level, the quadrivium objectives address the quadrivium arts. And then when I am going through, you guys can see up here on objectives, I then analyze my lesson and I make sure, okay, these are the ones that I am covering. And then underneath that, what lessons I'm covering, and then the topics I'm covering, and then what my daily plan is. I like doing them on the computer. It's not a lot. It's a little more work at the beginning to get this all set up. It's super easy after that, because unless I'm doing a major change, and when I finish a lesson and I'm like, that did not go well, and I need to redo that for next year, in which case I would probably change it on the spot. Okay. Otherwise, the next time I teach lessons 35 and 36, those are my topics. That's still what's in lesson 35 and 36. Those should be my objectives. I just have to make a quick check. Yep, I'm still covering those things. I don't want to change anything. And then it's just a matter of updating the dates, resaving it, not saving over it in terms of, on the computer. And I have that lesson plan done. But you can also do it handwritten too. Intentionally add appropriate trivium and quadrivium tools. Very important to be intentional about that. I label mine. You can do it in anything you want. A lesson plan book, typed on computer sheets of paper, handwritten. Okay, I wouldn't recommend napkins, but you can do it just about on anything. It really doesn't matter. And then I would have regular reviews with your fellow teachers, especially if you happen to teach the same subjects, right? Some of you do. Some of you are everything, right? Some of you are the teacher and the headmaster and the sometimes even the parent. And but if you can, have someone else review them and analyze the classical components, especially if something doesn't go well, right? What went wrong here? Because I was thinking this would be a great thing to do, and it just totally did not work out well. So I would encourage you to review that regularly with one another. Okay, with that said, I gave you the examples and kind of walked you through the packet. What questions, comments, or thoughts do you have? Or what other ways have you found to be intentional with quadrivium tools or trivium tools in your subject areas? Or what else can we talk about we actually have 10 minutes. Yes, ma'am.
I heard a concept of teaching memory backwards. Is that a little bit like your stacking example if you want to choose something that realm?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and going sometimes, and this is something that my daughter's piano teacher, she actually has them learn pieces in sections, but she learns them end to beginning. The benefit of something like that is especially when it's performance-based, or if like you have your class for Christmas program has to do Luke 2, 1 through 20, right, for the Christmas program. Sometimes it's helpful to start with verses 18 through 20, and then 15 through 20, and then 13 through 20. And why would we be doing this? Other than the fact that it gives us lots of repetition, but why would we be doing this? Yes, because the newest is at the front. And as you keep going in the performance, you're getting stronger and stronger and stronger and more confident and less likely to mess up. And you're getting to the stuff that's the most familiar at the end. So especially when it's performance-based for any reason, okay, whether it's a parent showcase at the end of the year, or whether you know that the end is harder. You already know that as a teacher, and so you're going to learn the harder stuff, and then they're building, and it's getting harder, but they think it's getting easier, anything like that. Yes, that's a good suggestion. All right, well, that's all I have prepared, so we can end a few minutes early, and if you guys have any things that you want to discuss just kind of one-on-one, feel free to come on up, and thank you very much for your kind attention.